0.3 has been live for just over 48 hours as of the time of this recording, and I've finished the campaign and interlude acts, I've completed over 100 abysses, and I'm into early mapping, so I figured I'd throw together a quick review or impressions video of the patch so far. First, I want to talk about Sprint, because it's the one change that's immediately available upon logging in, and it improves the experience throughout the entire campaign and endgame. Honestly, it's a game changer. It makes the overall pace of the game much better, especially when you have to backtrack through a map or on very large maps. But you can also use it just to run past a group of enemies or if you're trying to get somewhere. I think that some people are upset about it feeling a little clunky and with some of the potential knockdown if you get hit, but I don't really mind that. I would ideally like to see it handle collision with the environment a little bit smoother, because it is kind of annoying when you get stuck on something, but it's definitely manageable and feels way better than it did before. As for the knockdown, I was actually surprised. It happens less than I'd expect. Sometimes you can get hit and not get knocked down at all. I'm not sure if there's some threshold or what determines exactly when a hit knocks you down, but either way, I think it works pretty well and isn't too punishing. The next big change you'll notice early on is the new league mechanic, the Abyssal. If you haven't seen or played with it much, these fissures show up in the maps that affect nearby monsters. You defeat those monsters to close the fissures and eventually open a pit that spawns monsters empowered by the souls of those defeated near it. Think of it sort of like Ritual, except green, and more fun. When you complete the encounter, you get some loot and occasionally get a chance to hop into the Abyssal Depths, which is like a small to medium-sized map filled with abyss monsters and chests. Part of the rewards are items that you can add Abyssal modifiers to your gear, giving you a choice to pick one of 3 different modifiers. These seemed semi-rare throughout the campaign, especially early on. I think by the end of Act 2 I only had found like 2 or 3 of them, and that's with me completing pretty much every single abyss that I came across, which spawn in virtually every map during the league. Later on they start to feel a bit more plentiful, but they're still rare enough that you'll want to be somewhat picky about what you use them on. Whenever I got a nice bow upgrade is when I used one. On that note, something interesting I noticed, and I'm not sure if this was just my luck, but every single one I got was for weapons until near the end of Act 4 when other types started dropping. If that's the case and other types literally can't drop in the early game, that seems like a bit of an odd choice during a league that introduced Hollow Palm technique. Luckily I didn't go for that, but I think a good number of people were or are excited to try that out, and it would be sort of a feel-bad moment every time those dropped if you couldn't use it. Now that I'm at endgame, it seems like a good split of different types are dropping though. Aside from that reward specifically, they do feel pretty good and rewarding overall and worth doing. Like I said, I haven't skipped a single one I've found. There have been a couple I didn't complete though. They can be pretty tough, but they're worth it in my opinion. The one bad thing I will say about them is that at times they can cause performance issues. My PC is no slouch by any means, but my FPS tanks if there's a lot of abysses on a map with something like Burning Ground, or if there's Delirium or something like that, so I hope they can improve that somehow. That said, I do hope this mechanic becomes core. I'm having a blast with it and definitely don't want it to leave after the league is over. It gives maps an extra layer of randomness and fun, especially during campaign, which thus far has really lacked in the random event department. That's one thing I think PoE1 does much better that I hope PoE2 starts to incorporate as more and more league mechanics are introduced. Speaking of the campaign, let's talk about that next. With this update they added Act 4 and 3 interlude acts to replace Cruel. I didn't really mind Cruel during 0.1, but looking back, by the end of 0.2 it was starting to weigh on me. I play multiple characters per league, so at this point I've done Acts 1 through 3 over 10 times if you count Cruel difficulty. Act 3 is definitely my least favorite act, especially the second half, so I'm very happy to not have to run through it twice per character anymore. Act 4 is pretty long, but I wouldn't say it's overstayed its welcome by any means. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Each of the different islands in Act 4 feel different from one another. They are all pretty memorable and have some pretty fun bosses. I won't put them on screen to avoid spoiling them for anyone that hasn't finished it, but they had some interesting mechanics and some of them were quite challenging. My one complaint or negative in that regard I guess would be that I think the boss difficulty tuning is a bit off. Personally, I found Act 4's final boss to be a bit of a pushover compared to the 2 bosses that come directly before him. So I think they might want to make some slight adjustments there, but overall I was happy with it. As for the interludes, I think they are the perfect way to bridge the gap between Act 4 and the endgame. GGG are the kings of asset reuse, and that really goes to show with these. Each of the interludes incorporates some areas and enemies that you've seen before, but with a little twist. While not something you'd probably want to keep as part of the campaign forever, I think they'll be great for a few leagues or however long it takes for them to finish up Act 5. I did find that between the 4 acts and the interludes, it did take me a bit longer to get to endgame than it did in 0.2, but part of that is just because it's the first time playing through it, learning the new bosses and whatnot, so I think it'll even out in the long run. I don't have too much to say on balance and the passive tree changes. I've only played Deadeye for this league so far, and the changes there felt nice, but I can't really speak for other classes or ascendancies, and I'm not a build maker or knowledgeable enough to provide much insight into the passive tree. All I'll say is that it felt pretty good to me. The support gem changes were very much welcome though. It feels much better without the limitation of not being able to use the same support in multiple skills. It made it feel much more viable to experiment with multiple skills and combos, and not rely entirely on just one juiced up skill as much. In the end, you'll probably still have one or two skills that outperform the others based on your build, but it opens up the possibilities for more and it just feels good. Another great change is to crafting. Of course, we have the Abyss crafting stuff that I talked about earlier, but they also introduced multiple tiers of different crafting materials, with the higher tiers guaranteeing a better tier of modifier, and they adjusted essences to be less random, providing a specific modifier so you know what you're going to get before you use it. Before these changes, I would of course do a little crafting throughout the campaign, using transmutations, augmentations, regals, and the occasional exalt, but I would almost never use anything more. I literally never would use essences because they felt too rare and also unpredictable. Now, anytime I have a decent magic item, I was checking my essences tab to see if I had something good I could add. Knowing exactly what it's going to add and then it's just a lesser and I'll be getting better ones in endgame mean I have no reason not to use them. And now that I'm getting into the endgame, I'm starting to see the higher tiers of transmutations and augmentations, so when I get a good base or magic item, I'm able to give them a modifier with a decent tier. Crafting overall just feels much better. There's still room for improvement for sure, but it's a big step in the right direction. Lastly, let's talk about endgame. This update wasn't very endgame heavy, but there are a couple changes that are worth mentioning. I've only done a handful of maps so far, and I'm at about tier 5 maps, so I can't really speak on the pinnacles or Uber Arbiter or anything like that, but even the early endgame changes feel significant. The endgame has 25 new maps, with some of them having different requirements to enter, such as finding something in a nearby map that allows you access to it. I haven't played on one of those maps just yet, but I do have a couple very close to the starting area of my atlas that I'm excited to check out. One thing I have found though, is that some maps now have new encounters in them. I'm not sure how many or to what extent, but I found this little mini-boss monolith in a Steaming Springs map that spawned a bonus boss. I'm hoping stuff like this is semi-common and that more things like this continue to be added to the game. In the past, Jonathan has made a point that one of the big problems with the current endgame is that you can often go to a map knowing that it could be better, and it never feels good knowing that something isn't the best or that it's going to suck. He stated that they need more random events and things that can happen within a map to make it the best, or at least significantly better. I think that this is a step in the right direction. This is a small example of it, but that map, for example, had no mechanics on it within the atlas. I literally went into it thinking, well, this is gonna kinda suck. Even though I enjoy the Steaming Springs map, it had no league mechanics because I hadn't got to any towers yet. But then I found that, killed the boss, and I got an Exalted Orb, a pair of rare boots, a greater rune, and a greater orb of augmentation. I left happy, and then later in that same map, I came across an abyss that led to an Abyssal Depths. Instantly, it reminded me of Jonathan and what he said, and it makes sense. The more of those random things you can find in maps, the more rewarding and worthwhile those seemingly less ideal maps will feel when you actually run them. A more systematic change that's been made, though, is to the endgame leagues and their trees. They've been adjusted so that the difficulty doesn't come from the number of points spent in the tree anymore, but instead based on the number of splinters you use to access the pinnacle. And also, you gain access to your first 2 points from a quest the first time you interact with that mechanic in a map. Then you're given quests to obtain 50 splinters, which leads to the pinnacle fights where you can earn more points. The difficulty change I think is great, at least in theory. Like I said, I haven't done the pinnacles themselves yet, but it did feel just a little bit odd to have the difficulty as some of the nodes in the tree. And I think it's better like it is now, with the tree being primarily about improving those mechanics within your maps. I also think getting your first 2 points before you do the pinnacle is a good thing, but I'm not a big fan of how they did it. It's better than it was, and I think it's an easy fix, but the problem with the new implementation of it, in my opinion, is that the first 2 points are given to you too quickly now, and you don't really earn them at all. By being given the 2 points during the first time you interact with a mechanic, those 2 points are essentially the new baseline, and in the case of a new player, you're giving them points to spend on a mechanic that they barely understand and might not even know what to put them in. Then they have to interact with the mechanic another 20 plus times before they get to try the pinnacle. I think a better way to do it would be to have the first time you do the mechanic give you a quest to complete a number of them, like say 10 for example. Then after you complete 10, you turn in the quest and it gives you your first 2 points and gives you the quest for 50 splinters. By doing it that way, the player has interacted with the mechanic at least 10 times, so they have a feel for it and how it works, and what the general rewards are. So those 2 points would feel much more meaningful, and they could make a choice based on their experience thus far. And then the gap until the next 2 points is lower than it is under the current system, because if they've done 10 of them, they probably have 20 plus splinters, so they already feel like they're well on their way to the next quest and set of points. They would get to the pinnacle at around the same time or pace as it is under the current conditions, but it would feel better and more like progression from the player's perspective. Overall, I'm having an absolute blast with 0.3, and I'm super excited for the future of the game. There's still some work to be done, but this update brings multiple steps in the right direction. I think this is the most fun I've had with the game so far, and that's not to say I hadn't enjoyed it, I definitely have, but I foresee myself putting a lot of time into this league. Let me know in the comments below how your league launch has been, and if you agree or disagree with my impressions. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like or subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a ton and is greatly appreciated. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.